am an equal opportunity critic. By saying that, I am not a critic of equal opportunity. I just am a critic of all of our political parties equally, all right? I'm going to talk today about the Islamic State, ISIS, ISIL, depending on how you want to call them. And I'm going to try and leave you with the idea that despite what you've read in the press, what you see on television, this particular enemy can be defeated, and actually can be defeated with relative ease. That's what I'm going to try and do. But first of all, I want to talk to you about me being a critic. So the day before our last presidential election, in nationwide media, I was critical of President Obama. And I criticized him for saying, leading up to the election, that al-Qaeda was on the run and we shouldn't be worried about them. In fact, I said that al-Qaeda is running, but they're running amok. And I mentioned places in the world where they were actually increasing in their power, not decreasing in this article. But I wasn't the only one to mention this in the press. In fact, cartoonists picked it up too. By the way, I'm 68 years old, and an IRS had never audited me. But after being critical of the president, 6 weeks later, I was audited, and I have been audited even once again. Now, I don't know if there's a cause and effect relationship there. All right. Critical of President Obama, I have also been critical of President Bush and his "you can run but you can't hide" policy. So what happens if you're someone like, Zawahiri here, and you have run and you have hidden? You run and you do hide. What does it say about your policy? Shame, shame on you. Shame on you. I didn't know there were going to be so many children in the audience. Yeah. What happens if you run and you do hide? I mean, your policy has failed, in my view. So now we have both, I'm critical of both the Bush and the Obama administrations for the policy to deny al-Qaeda sanctuary. And the notion is that if you deny al-Qaeda sanctuary, then they will not be able to regroup, plan, organize, and hit the United States like they did on 9/11 and so eloquently talked about by one of your previous speakers. So I think that policy is flawed and failed also, and I'll tell you why. Think back 2 decades when al-Qaeda did have sanctuary in Sudan. We used diplomacy to convince the Sudanese government to expel al-Qaeda, and they went to Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, we didn't persevere, and they were able to set up, organize, and hit the United States. However, after 9/11, when they had sanctuary, we were able to use intelligence, air power, and U.S. Army Special Forces to actually fairly and easily and quickly defeat al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. This is Special Forces Team 547, 12 men, along with 50 indigenous fighters commanded by Hekmat Karzai, were able to defeat near Tarwak in Afghanistan more than 2,000 al-Qaeda and Taliban fighters. Now, you see they're all barrel-chested commandos, right? I want you to know that 30, 40, even, well, 40, 30, maybe 20 years ago, I too was a barrel-chested commando. My barrel has slipped a little bit in retirement. So the results of our denying sanctuary policy is, I'm sure you've all heard of whack-a-mole. Well, we have a whack-a-terrorist policy. And so what happens when you whack them, they turn up other places, right? So by not enabling the set up in sanctuaries somewhere where you know where they are, you know who they are, you know what they have, we have allowed them to disperse, become amorphous, and it's become exceedingly difficult to find them, fix them, and fight them. And by adhering to this denying sanctuary policy, much blood, much treasure, and, in my view, failure. So what do I advocate? I'm going to use ISIL, depending on what you want to call them, as my case study for the reverse, allowing a terrorist organization to gain sanctuary for a while. So let's imagine ISIS has sanctuary. I'll show you another map. These areas, the colored areas, are the areas that they either control or will control or soon control or have some control, about the size of Colorado now. And we see it as a challenge. Pundits, critics, academics say because they have oil, they have wealth, they can get money, they have territory, they have conventional weapons now, and they're so brutal that they will be almost impossible to defeat. And I'm going to try and convince you otherwise. I view the ISIS as an opportunity to fix a terrorist group in a location and address them. So let me go through some ways. We say that they have money. They do. They coerce money out of those citizens they're trying to co-opt. They have oil, I'll talk about in a second. They have gold, they robbed banks, they took banks, and we think that the corpus is about $2 billion. But I will tell you that financial institutions are targets, not just military targets such as this. This is their equivalent of their Fort Knox, their finance center in Raqqa. It's hard to tell from this graphic here, but we hit the important parts of that building without hitting parts where people were. Pretty precise. But you not only can use sort of military assets to attack targets, you can also use financial institutions that we did against Al-Qaeda. We took their money away very quickly. So there are things you can do economically to address this notion that they have money, can move money, have banks. It's actually to our advantage if we use all the elements of power to do so. They have oil. They sell oil to Turkish and Syrian criminals at much discounted rates, all right? So what can you do if you know they have oil? Just what we've done. Now, they were hesitant to do so because after ISIS, we want the local people, or Kurds or whomever, to be able to use this oil for their own benefit. So you don't want to destroy it entirely, but we could if we had to. The Caliphate state. That Caliphate state, if you put it out to its extremes, would be about the size of Montana, now about the size of Colorado or Wyoming. All right? But if you're going to have a state, you have to have borders. And you know how hard it is for us to control our borders? Think if they have a state and they try and maintain borders, how difficult it would be for them to keep us out of their so-called country. They call themselves a proto-state. A proto-state has to have infrastructure. You have to have buildings, communication systems, transportation systems, all targets. Brutality. ISIS is one of the most brutal organizations on the planet. But there's something in sociological science that says there is a plateau, there is a level of brutality that an organization can reach before the citizenry of the area that they control will react. In the United States, actually, it was in the 30s when we had gangsters in the United States, and they became so violent that citizenry in the United States, not the Bureau or police, but citizens stood up. Well, this is beginning to happen in areas controlled or around where ISIS is operating now. They have conventional weapons now. They stole all the weapons that we gave to the Iraqis. They stole weapons that the Russians gave to Syrians. So I have all these conventional weapons. Two things. The conventional weapons that they stole from Iraqis that we gave to the Iraqis were, what, maintained by American contractors. So do you think American contractors are going to work for ISIS? I don't think so. So they will fail. Russian weapons, a little bit less sophisticated, a little bit easier to maintain, but still they will break down. So eventually these will all break down. And if they don't break down, that's what can happen to them. Charismatic leadership. This is al-Baghdadi. We're not sure whether or not we injured him 2 weeks ago in an attack. We think we might have, but eventually he will be a target. Foreign fighters, huge challenge, particularly for you in this room and in the United States. There are now more than 3,000 foreign fighters in Iraq and Syria. No, 30, did I say 3,000 or 30,000? I did go to Harvard, but I'm not a math major, okay? 30,000 foreign fighters in Iraq and Syria. 3,000 of those are from Europe, carrying European passports, and 150 from the United States of America, fighting in Iraq and Syria. So, I mean, the bad news is that when they come back, they have an opportunity to create havoc here in the United States or their home country, or adopted country, better term. However, if we can get them there so that they don't return, or get them when they do try to return, which we're becoming more sophisticated at doing, I see it as an opportunity, not necessarily a challenge. Timing is important. Timing is important. What I have advocated about letting ISIS set up, gain sanctuary, has risk. Because if you let them have sanctuary for too long, then you do run the risk of another 9/11 in the United States. So we have to be watchful, careful, but we need to pick the right time to engage them, not with thousands of boots on the ground, but with good intelligence, air power, special operations, just like we did in Afghanistan, But we have to make sure that we do it when the timing is correct. Coordinated intelligence is the most important asset in what I'm advocating. And finally, there are some in our government, libertarians in particular, who say that we should not engage in Iraq and Syria against ISIS. And I have to tell you that I am sympathetic to that argument. States like the United States that get involved in other countries' civil wars don't fare very well. But I will tell you, I believe we have some moral obligation to those who can't fight for themselves, particularly minorities in this area, Christians, Azizis, and others. Who protects them? Who looks out for them? So while I do agree that getting involved in more international warfare is not in the best interest of the United States, I do care for those who cannot protect themselves. That's my pitch. Thank you very much.